The sound of my cane tapping against the parquet floor is steady and unwavering, like the ticking of a clock in a room that has forgotten how to move. Step tap, step tap. The rhythm fills the silence of my house as I walk methodically through. The familiar paths. The same 5 rooms, bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, living room, study are the ones I move through each day, like a ghost of my former self, wandering in a home that has become more of a memory than a place. Today marks exactly 137 days since Veronica's funeral. It's hard to believe it's been that long. Every day, I wake up and tear off another page from the wall calendar. It's a small thing, a leftover habit from my working days. Veronica would always laugh at it. "There are electronic calendars for that, Abbott," she'd joke. But there was warmth in her eyes when she said it. She knew how important this little ritual of mine was to me, how it gave me some semblance of control. Over time, in a world that feels like it's slipping away from me, my house, the one in North Balloy, is far too big for one person. It's meant for a family of 5, yet it feels like a hollow shell now, a museum filled with the ghosts of the past. The 2-story Victorian architecture that Veronica and I fell in love with 35 years ago now stands as a silent monument to a life once shared. I still remember that first day we stepped inside together, both excited by the space and the possibilities. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "This is where our Audrey will grow up," and grow up she did in these walls. But now, when Audrey visits, she moves through the house like someone walking through a mausoleum. Her last visit was 3 weeks ago, a quick, stiff affair, more out of obligation than a desire to reconnect. I pour myself a cup of coffee, filling the mug with the faded inscription, "Best Dad." Audrey gave it to me for my 50th birthday, back when she was still in university. It feels like a lifetime ago. The morning light filters softly through the lace curtains Veronica had ordered from Europe, always elegant, always perfect. Veronica had impeccable taste, and Audrey, well, she inherited much of that. The same dark hair, the same straight nose, the same sharp eye for detail. But her temperament was different. Softer, more malleable, too easily bent to the will of others, especially Keith. I sit down in my chair, facing the garden, and open the newspaper. It's a habit that refuses to leave me, even though I've already read most of the headlines. Online. At 76, though, there's something grounding about holding something physical in my hands. "Why do you still get this, Dad?" Audrey had asked the last time she was here. "You can't read half of it without your glasses." And I could see Keith's lip curl into a smug, condescending smile. "My eyesight's fine," I had replied, even though I was squinting at the small print. I added, "and the paper supports local businesses." Keith snorted. "You're always finding a reason to justify your habits," he said, tapping away on his latest phone model. "Just admit you don't want to change." Veronica would never have let him speak to me like that. But she's gone now, and Audrey avoids my gaze, a weak, awkward smile on her face. I sigh and set the paper aside. The house feels unnervingly quiet. Sometimes I turn on the radio or TV just for the sound, though I've never been one to enjoy either. Veronica used to fill the silence with her laughter, the clinking of dishes in the kitchen, the soothing tones of classical music from the stereo in the living room. I glance at the silver-framed photograph on the mantel, one from 20 years ago, of our little family. Veronica, me, and Audrey at 15, all of us smiling, the wind ruffling Veronica's hair as she stood beside me. Audrey is nestled against my shoulder, her trust and affection so clear in that moment that it makes my chest tighten. Where did that warmth go? I remember exactly when the shift began. It was 7 years ago when Audrey brought Keith into our home for the first time. He was tall, trim, with an almost perfect smile that never seemed to falter. He had recently been promoted to an analyst position at Midwest Financial, and his every movement exuded ambition. The first thing he asked as he surveyed the house was, "How long has your family lived here?" At the time, I didn't realize that he wasn't asking about the history of the house. He was sizing us up, assessing our financial situation. Veronica, more astute than I was, saw right through him. He wasn't admiring the house, Abbott, she had remarked later. He was evaluating us. The first year of their relationship, things were fine. Audrey still called every day, came over on weekends, shared stories of her work at the architecture firm. But gradually, her visits grew less frequent and our conversations became shorter. When Audrey and Keith got married 5 years ago, that's when I lost her. Their wedding was extravagant, 300 guests, most of them Keith's business colleagues. Audrey had wanted something small and intimate, but Keith had insisted on a grand affair. I remember how she looked that day, beautiful, but distant, like she was playing a role in someone else's script. After their honeymoon in the Maldives, they bought a house in a ritzy neighborhood in Madison. Keith had climbed the corporate ladder quickly, becoming the vice president of analytics, and Audrey, well, she had quit her job at the architecture firm. "Just for a while, Dad," she explained. "Keith needs me to attend corporate events with him, and we're planning on having kids." But the kids never came, and Audrey's break from work became permanent. Now, she's busy with charity projects and organizing social events, things Keith says are vital for his career. I finish my coffee, stand up, and lean on my cane. My knee has been aching for years now, ever since an old injury from when I was a young engineer on a construction site. I limp to the bookcase and pull out a photo album. Veronica had always been so meticulous about documenting our lives, every photo carefully labeled in her neat handwriting with dates, places, and events. I flipped through the pages, watching Audrey grow up. Her first steps, her first day of school, her graduation, her university days. Each photo is a painful reminder of what we had and what we've lost. I can't seem to stop going back to these memories, especially now that Veronica is gone, and Audrey has become nearly a stranger to me. The last time we were all together as a family was 2 weeks before Veronica passed away. She already knew her diagnosis, but she carried it with a quiet dignity. We invited Audrey and Keith over for dinner. Veronica made roast beef, Audrey's favorite dish. They were 40 minutes late. Keith apologized, citing an important work meeting, but it was obvious he wasn't paying attention to anyone at the table. He kept checking his phone as though he had more important things to do. Veronica tried to keep the conversation going, asking about their lives, their upcoming vacation plans. "We're thinking about Europe," Audrey said, her voice flat. "Keith deserves a break after closing such a big deal." "What about you, honey?" Veronica asked, her voice soft. "Do you think you deserve a break too?" Audrey hesitated, but Keith answered for her. "Audrey's doing just fine being the wife of a successful man. It's a job too, isn't it?" I saw Veronica's lips tighten. She had always been independent, a woman who balanced her career and family with such grace. But this new dynamic hurt her, and I saw it in the way she held herself that evening. After dinner, as Audrey helped her mother clear the table, Keith turned to me. "How's retirement, Abbott? Don't you miss your work?" I told him I was consulting on a few projects, that my experience was still valuable. He patted me on the shoulder, dismissing me with a smile. Sure, as long as you keep your brain active, right? At your age, it's important to stay busy." There was no direct insult, but the way he spoke to me, the tone was condescending, as if I were a helpless old man. I kept my mouth shut for Veronica, for Audrey. But now I regret it. I regret all the times I swallowed my pride, the times I didn't stand up for myself, didn't put Keith in his place. I regret letting him think I was weak, a feeble old man. Veronica saw it all. In her last days, when we were alone together, she often spoke of Audrey. "She's changed, Abbott," Veronica whispered, her voice frail. "He's changing her, and not for the better." I closed the album and set it down. It's time to get ready for my weekly chess club meeting. It's one of the few social activities I still participate in after retirement. The club is hosted at a local college, and its members are a mix of people from all generations. I enjoy the variety, the different perspectives. I climb the stairs to my bedroom to change. Veronica and I's room remains almost untouched. I can't bring myself to put away her things. Her perfume lingers on the dressing table. Her clothes still hang in the closet. The book she never finished sits on the bedside table, a bookmark marking page 213. Sometimes I sit in her chair by the window, imagining she's still here, watching the garden she loved so much. I talk to her, tell her about my day. It might seem pathetic to anyone else, but I don't care. I slip on the tweed jacket Veronica gave me for my 70th birthday. She had laughed when I first tried it on, teasing me, "You look like an Oxford professor." I smile at the memory, though my eyes sting with unshed tears. I head downstairs and grab my car keys. Audrey had suggested, not so subtly, that it might be time for me to stop driving. But I've passed all the tests at the DMV, and my license is valid for another 3 years. Plus, I never take the highway, always stick to familiar routes. Leave the house, locking the door behind me. My Volvo, though an older model, is in perfect condition. I take as much care of it as I do my home. Keith once suggested I trade it in for something newer, more fitting of my status, but I refused. This was the car Veronica and I picked together, and I'm not ready to part with it. On my way to the college, I passed the Preston Chemicals building, the one Veronica's father founded. The massive structure of glass and concrete looms over the city, a symbol of the Preston family's influence on Boy's economy. Veronica was proud of it, proud of her heritage. A member of the board of directors, although her brother Richard handled the operational management. I never got involved in the family business, concentrating on my career in engineering at Midwest Construction. By the time I retired, I was a project manager responsible for major construction projects in 3 states. My job brought in a steady, good income, and along with Veronica's money, well-lived more than comfortably. Audrey and Keith must assume that I live mostly on retirement. They don't know about my investments and consulting contracts that provide me with additional income, and we never talked much about Veronica's share of the Preston business in front of Keith. I park outside the College building and walk slowly toward the room where the chess club meets. On the way, I meet Benjamin Paxton, my old friend and regular chess partner. "How's your knee, Abbott?" he asks. Noticing my cane dot, "It's been better," I reply. "But Dr. Klein says I'm in great shape for my age. How's Audrey?" "Still married to that pompous banker." Ben is one of the few people who can see right through Keith. They've met at a few town events, and Ben has taken an instant dislike to my son-in-law. "Things haven't changed," he sighed. "They came 3 weeks ago. They spent an hour here and left, citing some important appointment. Have you thought about moving closer to them?" Ben asks as we enter the clubroom. Madison isn't that far away after all. "And be a burden?" I shake my head. "No, Ben. I'll stay in my house as long as I can take care of myself. And when I can't, well, there are wonderful boarding houses for the elderly." Ben frowns, but he doesn't argue. He's a widower himself and understands my desire for independence. We sit down at the chessboard, and I forget my troubles for a while, immersed in the familiar game. My mind becomes clear as I calculate moves, strategize, and anticipate my opponent's actions. At such moments, I feel younger, sharper. After a few games, 2 of which I win, Ben and I go to the cafeteria for coffee. Elliot Tyson, an economics professor and one of the younger members of the club, joins us. "I heard about Veronica Preston's death," he says, turning to me. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Holbrook. I've been studying the Preston Chemicals case study for my students. An impressive company with a strong corporate culture. Thank you, Elliot." I nod. Veronica was proud of the family business. "Understand. The controlling interest is still in the family's hands?" the professor asks. "Yes, between Richard and Andy Stammer, not wanting to go into the details of the inheritance, the other family members." Elliot tactfully changes subject, but this brief conversation brings me back to my thoughts about Veronica's inheritance. I know I'll have Edo meet with the Preston family lawyer soon to discuss her will. Veronica has never explicitly mentioned her financial arrangements, but has hinted that she has taken care of me. When Ben and I say goodbye after the club, he invites me to dinner the following Friday. My daughter Lauren is coming with her grandchildren. He says they'd love to see you. I agree, feeling slightly jealous. Ben and his daughter have always been close, even after she married. She calls Jaime every day, brings the kids over on weekends. It's not like Audrey and me. On my way home, I stop at the supermarket. The grocery cart looks so empty for one person. A pack of coffee, bread, eggs, a few apples, a ready-made dinner from the cooking department. I didn't cook as much as I used to. What's the point of trying for just myself? In the checkout line, I notice a local newspaper with a headline about the expansion of Preston Chemicals. I buy a copy to read at home. Upon returning, I put the car in the garage and walk slowly to the front door. The house greets me with silence and coolness. I turn on the light in the hallway, hang up my jacket, and go into the kitchen to sort through my purchases. A cooked dinner heats up in the microwave while I look through the mail in the newspaper. An article on Preston Chemicals reports on a new line of environmentally industrial solvents that the company will start producing next quarter. It was Veronica's project. She's always insisted that a business should not only be profitable, but responsible. I eat dinner in the drawing room, sitting at the head of a large table that seats 12. Veronica and I use set to host receptions here for coworkers and friends. Now I only use this end-off table, and the rest of it is covered with a tablecloth to protect the polished wood. After dinner, I grab a book and sit down in the living room. The antique clock on the mantelpiece strikes 900 p.m. It was once the time when Veronica and I discussed the day, shared news, made plans. Now I just listen to the ticking of the clock and the rustle of pages. The phone rings unexpectedly loud in the silence of the house. Audrey's name pops up on the screen. I answer it, trying to make my voice sound cheerful. "Hi, Daddy." Her voice sounds strained. "How are you?" "I'm fine, honey. Went to the chess club today. Won 2 games against Ben. That's so good." Pause. "Daddy Keith and I were wondering, have you thought about selling the house? It's too big for you alone, and it's a lot of work to take care of. Here it is." I knew this conversation would happen sooner or later. I love my house, Audrey, and I'm doing fine with taking care of it. I have an au pair who comes twice a week. But it's so unsustainable, Dad. You could get a smaller apartment, maybe in a gated senior complex. There'd be company medical care. I don't need medical care. I interrupt her. And I'm not going to sell the house you grew up in where your mom and I spent our whole lives. Silence on the other end of Feline, then a sigh. It's just a house, Dad, and the money from the sale would give you a comfortable old age. My old age is comfortable enough as itis, I replied, feeling the irritation rising inside me. And I'd rather have Mickens visit me here than in a secure compound. Keith and I are very busy, you know that? Her voice sounds almost resentful. But we're worried about you. I hold back a bitter laugh. Worried? I'd like to believe. But no, this isn't about worry. It's about the house they assume they'll get someday. Apparently, they don't want to wait. Thank you for your concern, Audrey, but I'm quite self-sufficient and happy in my own home. Okay, Dad. Her tone makes it clear that the conversation isn't over, just postponed. We'll come back next week and talk about everything in person. We say goodbye and I hang up the phone feeling heavy on my heart. My daughter's calls used to make me happy, but now they've become a source of tension and hidden resentment. I go upstairs to my bedroom. Before going to bed, I look at Veronica's picture on the bedside table as always. They're getting more and more persistent, darling, I say too. The portrait. I don't know how much longer I can resist. As I fall asleep, I think about what Veronica would say if she were me. She's always been stronger than when it comes to resisting pressure. Don't let them manipulate you, Abbott. I feel as if I can. Hear her voice. You deserve respect, especially from your own daughter. With those thoughts, I fall asleep and Veronica's in my bed, alone in the big empty house. The Hartley, Morrison and Associates law firm's office was in an old building in downtown. B.O. I'd been here a few times with Veronica when some family paperwork was needed. Today, I walked through the massive doors alone, leaning on my cane harder than usual. My knee had ached again during the night, a reminder of my age and the frailty of my body. The young woman at the front desk smiled at me with the polite patience usually reserved for the elderly. Mr. Holbrook, Mr. Hartley is expecting you. Please proceed to conference room number 3. I nodded and walked slowly down the hallway, looking at the portraits of the firm's founders on the walls. I wonder if I will live to see the day when I will not be perceived as a burdensome old man, but as a person with a wealth of experience and knowledge. Or is this just an illusion that all older people create for themselves, clinging to the last crumbs of dignity? Warren Hartley stepped up to meet me as I entered the conference room. The 60-year-old lawyer had been a friend of Preston family since the days of Veronica's father. His impeccably tailored suit and neatly trimmed graying bird made him look like a successful old-school lawyer. Abbott. He shook my hand with genuine warmth. It's good to see you, though the circumstances are not the most pleasant. Warren, I nodded. Thank you for taking the time. I always make time for the Preston family. He pointed to a chair. Have a seat, please. Coffee, if I may. I lowered myself into the comfortable leather chair, trying not to wheezy at the pain in my knee. Hartley noticed my grimace and frowned. Is everything all right? It's just an old injury, I dismissed it. Nothing serious. He nodded and pressed a button on the intercom, ordering coffee for both of us. Then he pulled a folder of documents out of his briefcase and spread them out in front of him. Abbott, I know it hasn't been that long since, he paused, Veronica's departure, but some legal issues need to be addressed in a timely manner. I understand, I said, trying to stay calm, though the very mention of Veronica still hurt. Good. Hartley append the folder. As you know, Preston Chemicals was founded by Veronica's father in 1958 as a small laboratory for the production of industrial solvents. Today, it's a diversified chemical holding company with annual sales of over $200 million. I nodded. It was a story I had heard many times from Veronica herself. After Veronica's parents died, Hartley mentioned, the ownership of the company was split 40 to 60% between her and her brother, Richard. Richard took over as CEO and Veronica joined the board of directors, retaining the right to vote in strategic matters. There was a knock on the door and the secretary brought in a tray of coffee. Hartley paused until we're alone again. In her will, he continued, taking a sip of coffee. Veronica made clear instructions about her share of the company. Abbott, shelved all her shares to you. I squeezed the coffee cup so hard that my knuckles turned white. I'd suspected something like that, but to hear it officially, what's the appraised value of these shares? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. According to the latest valuation done 3 months ago, Veronica's 40% stake in Preston Chemicals is worth approximately $9 million. The figure hit me like a hammer. $9 million, a sum that could completely change a life. I took a deep breath, trying to grasp this new reality. What about Audrey? I asked. Veronica didn't leave anything to our daughter. Hartley pressed his lips together and pulled another document out off the folder. This is Veronica's personal letter addressed to you. She asked me to give it to you along with official inheritance papers. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Veronica's neat handwriting. I took it, feeling my hands tremble. I think you'll find the answers to your questions in it, Hartley said softly. In the meantime, we can discuss the technical aspects of the stock transfer and your new responsibilities as a shareholder. The next hour was spent discussing the legal formalities. Hartley explained what documents had to be signed, what taxes had to be paid, and how we would interact with the board of directors. I listened half-heartedly, mentally, returning to the sealed letter that was burning my jacket pocket. Does Richard know about Veronica's decision? I asked when we were done with the paperwork. Yes, I've already met with him. Hartley nodded. He is surprised, but he's accepted his sister's will. Hopes to meet with you soon to discuss further cooperation. And Audrey, does she know? Hartley shook his head. According to Veronica's instructions, the information about the distribution of the inheritance should be given to you first and then to the other family members at your discretion. I nodded, realizing that I had a difficult decision to make. When and how to tell my daughter that her mother's multi-million-dollar inheritance had gone to me and not to her. Thank you, Warren. I stood up, leaning on my cane. I need to think this over. Of course, Hess stood up too. You know where to find me if you have any questions. And Abbott, he paused. Veronica was an amazing woman. She always knew what she was doing. I shook his hand silently and walked out of the office, feeling the stares of the staff. I wonder if they know that I just became a multi-millionaire. Or to them, am I still just an old man with a cane, the hour of Veronica Preston? In the car, I couldn't stand it any longer and printed out the envelope. Several sheets of paper, written in familiar handwriting. I sighed and began to read. My dear Abbott, if you are reading this letter, it means I am no longer by your side. Forgive the cliché, but some things need to be said bluntly, even if they sound like clichés from novels. I know you're surprised by my decision to leave you my share of the family business. You may even think it's unfair to Audrey. Let me explain. When my father founded Preston Chemicals, his guiding principle was that the business should serve the family, not the family, the business. He wasn't building the company for money, but to secure a future for his children and grandchildren. But not just a material future. He wanted the business to uphold family values, to strengthen ties between generations. Over the past few years, I've watched our daughter change under Keith's influence. From a bright, independent girl with ambitions of her own, she is turning into an appendage to her husband, a shadow of the man you and I raised. I can't blame this on Keith alone. Audrey made her choice, but I can't help but see how that choice is alienating her from us, especially from you. Remember that Thanksgiving 3 years ago? We had them over for family dinner and Keith spent the entire time talking about new investment opportunities and how important it was to build capital. When you shared a story about how you helped a former colleague who was in a difficult situation, Keith called it a misuse of resources. And Audrey, She just sat by and nodded as if those cold calculations were her opinion, too. Or remember last Christmas when Keith insisted on spending the holidays not with us, but at a ski resort with his business associates. Audrey called you just 3 days before Christmas, knowing how much you were looking forward to seeing her. I saw your face after that call, Abbott. I saw you trying to hide your disappointment by saying that young people have to make their own lives. And remember last year when you had that nasty heart episode? Audrey didn't show up at the hospital because Keith had an important corporate dinner. They didn't show up until the third day when the danger had passed. And Keith kept checking his phone, clearly bored and wanting to leave as soon as possible. I'm not telling you all this to stir up resentment or bitterness. I just want you to understand that my decision to leave the stock to you is not just a financial arrangement. It's my way of protecting what my father built for the family. If I had left my share to Audrey, it would have gone to Keith. I've seen how he looks at our fortune as a resource to be optimized as a means to achieve his ambitions. In his hands, the family business would lose its soul, become just another asset in an investment portfolio. You, Abbott, despite not being Preston by blood, have always understood the true value of what me father created. You respect tradition, value people over profit, never chase status, and the trappings of success. You are the kind of person I can trust with my family's legacy. I'm not saying Audrey should be left with nothing. I'm just giving you the righto. Decide when and how she will participate in the family business. Perhaps in time she'll reevaluate her priorities. Maybe she'll remember the values we taught her. Or maybe she'll finally choose the path Keith led her down. Either way, I trust you to make a wise decision. Forgive me for putting this burden on you. I know it won't be easy for you. Audrey may not understand, may accuse you of stealing her inheritance. Keith will probably push, use legal threats, manipulate your feelings for your daughter. Be prepared for that, my dear. But remember, you rest stronger than you look. Behind your softness lies the steel I've always loved about you. Don't let them make you out yourself. Don't let them treat you like an old man out of his mind to be manipulated. You deserve respect from both your daughter and son-in-law. I loved you every day of our lives together, Abbott. And even now, as a leave, I continue to love and care for you. Use this inheritance wisely, not to buy Audrey's affection or Keith's respect. That's impossible. Use it to live a decent life, to uphold the value us believe in, to continue my work at Preston Chemicals. And please don't let grieving for me cloud your remaining years. Live life to the fullest. Enjoy every day. I'll be there for every breath you take, every beat of your heart. Always yours, Veronica. I did notice the tears rolling down my face. Only when a drop fell on the paper, blurring the ink, did I wake up and carefully folded the letter, tucking it back into the envelope. Veronica, even in death, she found a way to support me, to protect me, to give me strength for what lay ahead. I started the car and drove home, thinking about everything I'd learned today. Veronica's letter confirmed my own observations and fears, but made it even more obvious that forfeiting the inheritance forever would not work. Sooner or later, Audrey and Keith would find out. And then at home, the first thing I did was to go to the study and pull out a thick folder of photographs and documents, a kind of chronicle of our family life that Veronica had kept over the years. Going through the pictures, I could see how her daughter had changed. Here's Audrey, a college graduate, proud and confident. Here she is in her first office in an architecture firm at a desk piled high with blueprints. And here's her first picture, with Keith at some charity event. He was already standing just ahead of her, sort of pushing her into the background. I remembered how Audrey talked about her projects, how her eyes lit up when she talked about restoring historic buildings in downtown Madison. Where is that passion now? Where is her ambition, her dreams? all consumed with Keith's career, his quest for status, and financial success. Her gaze fell on our recent Thanksgiving photo. Audrey sitting next to Keith, her posture tense, her smile seeming tortured. This is not the happy girl Veronica and I raised. This is a woman who lost herself in a marriage to a man who turned her into an accessory for his success. I remembered other episodes not mentioned by Veronica in the letter. How Keith had talked Audrey out of taking on a major restoration project because a banker's wife shouldn't work in construction. How he insisted on moving to a neighborhood where mostly his colleagues lived, even though Audrey loved their former home closer to downtown. How he gradually pushed all his friends outside of his work and ambitions away from her, and how their attitude toward me had changed since Veronica's death. They used to have at least some decorum, but now even that thin layer of politeness was gone. I'd become a burden, an inconvenient reminder of their moral obligations. The last conversation with Audrey about selling the house was just the tip of the iceberg. I knew what would come next. Carrying offers to move into a nursing home, innuendos about my inability to take care of myself, and then perhaps legal maneuvers to establish guardianship, and now there's inheritance factor. $9 million is a sum that can destroy even the strongest of family bonds. What will she do with a relationship that's already fraying at seams? I walked to the office window, looking out at the orchard Veronica loved so much. The apple trees we'd planted the year Audrey was born were now bursting with fruit. The gazebo where we'd spent summer evenings. It all held the memory of our family's best days. It wasn't an easy decision to make, but in the end, I had no choice. I had to protect Veronica's legacy, not only materially, but spiritually as well. I had to honor her last will and the trust she had placed in me. I won't tell Audrey and Keith about the inheritance. At least not yet. First, I must meet Richard, understand how the company works, get up to speed. I have to prepare for the inevitable confrontation that will ensue and the truth comes out, and it will come out. I had no illusions about that. There are no secrets in a small town like Boy. As Veronica had predicted, I was in for a tough test. But now I had her letter, a reminder that I was not alone, that I was acting in accordance with her will, that I was protecting what we both believed in. I put the photos back in the folder and tucked it away in my desk drawer. Then I pulled out my cell phone and found Richard Preston's number. It was time to take matters into my own hands. It was to prove that I wasn't a helpless old man who could be manipulated and ignored. I was Abbott Holbrook, Veronica Preston's husband, and now a $9 million shareholder in Preston Chemicals. It had been 2 weeks since I learned of the inheritance. In that time, I had time to meet Richard Preston, Veronica's brother, and immerse myself in Preston Chemicals. Richard was more than happy for me to attend. Apparently, he has always valued my engineering expertise and management experience. We agreed that I would attend monthly board meetings and delve into the company's current projects, especially the new green solvents business that Veronica had started. I deliberately avoided talking to Audrey about the inheritance. She called a few times, mostly to revisit the subject of selling the house, but I skillfully turned the conversation to other topics. I needed time to think and prepare. That Saturday morning, I did my usual garden chores. Veronica had always insisted that we should take care of the plants ourselves, even if we could afford a gardener. It's therapy for the soul, she used to say. And I knew she was right, especially now that working in the garden had become a way for me to stay in touch with her. The sound of a car pulling up made me lift my head from the rose bushes. Keith's black Audi stopped at the gate. I hadn't expected their visit. Audrey hadn't said anything about coming during our last conversation. There was another car parked next to the Audi, a silver Lexus I hadn't seen before. I slowly straightened up, shook the earth off my gardening gloves, and walked toward the house. My knee was making itself felt again, forcing me to lean harder on my cane. Not now, I thought, trying to control my face so I wouldn't show pain. Keith was already ringing the doorbell when I walked in the back door. Audrey was standing next to him, pale and tense, and just behind him was an unfamiliar man in a strict suit with a leather briefcase. "Dad," Audrey stepped forward as I opened the door. "We need to talk." "Of course, dear." I tried to smile. "Come on in. I'll just wash my hands." I headed for the bathroom, feeling the tension thicken in the air. Something had happened. Something had changed. Audrey didn't just look worried. She looked almost frightened. And Keith exuded that peculiar energy I'd noticed in him before important business negotiations. A mixture of aggression and anticipation. When I returned to the living room, I found all three of them sitting on the couch. Keith in the center, Audrey to his left, the stranger in his right. I sank into my chair trying to look relaxed. "So, what do I owe the pleasure?" I asked, looking at my daughter. "Abbott," Keith took the lead, not letting Audrey answer. "Let me introduce Mr. Andrew Greenberg, senior partner of Greenberg and Associates." The lawyer gave me a brief nod. "Mr. Holbrook." "Mr. Greenberg." I nodded back politely, though my insides clenched. "A lawyer, so this is a serious case." "Dad," Audrey finally said, her voice shaking, "why didn't you tell us about Mom's stock?" There it was. The truth had come out just as I'd suspected. The only question was when and how they found out. "How did you find out?" I asked, determined not to deny the obvious. "I have friends in financial circles," Keith straightened, clearly pleased with his knowledge. "Lloyd is a small town, Abbott. Things like this don't stay secret for long." I nodded, accepting that explanation. Most likely someone at Preston Chemicals had blurted it out, or perhaps Richard himself had mentioned it in a conversation with a business associate. Information travels fast in those circles. "And what do you want to discuss?" I asked, not wanting to make it any easier. "Dad," Audrey stepped forward, "Mom left you her share of the company. It's $9 million. I know the value of the stock." "Dear," I said softly. "Then you must realize that's not fair." There was a hint of resentment in her voice. "Mom always said that the Preston business was a family legacy that should pass down from generation to generation. I'm her daughter, her only child. Why would she disinherit me?" I looked at her and saw the pain in her eyes. Genuine pain, not just greed or calculation. But then I noticed Keith's hand on her shoulder, a possessive, controlling gesture. Veronica had every right to dispose of her property as she saw fit. I said she made her decision and intend to honor it. A decision made under the influence of severe illness. Under the influence of powerful drugs, Greenberg interjected, opening his briefcase. "We have reason to believe that Veronica Preston was not of sound mind when she signed the last draft of her will." "What hell?" I could feel my anger boiling over. "You didn't even know her." Veronica was lucid until the very end. The oncology didn't affect her brain. However, Greenberg pulled out documents. The drug she was taking could have significantly affected her cognitive function. We consulted with experts. "What experts?" My voice got harder. "Did you access her medical records?" "That's illegal." "We work with publicly available information about the effects of certain drugs," the lawyer replied evasively. "And there's legal precedent for challenging wills made under similar circumstances." I shifted my gaze to Audrey. She looked embarrassed, but she wasn't stopping this farce. Did she really believe her mother was incapacitated, or was she just letting Keith act on her behalf like he always did? "We don't want to take this to court, Abbott." Keith spoke softly now, almost friendly. "We're all family here, and we can work this out amongst ourselves. A fair division of the inheritance is what we want." "And what do you think is fair?" I asked, already knowing the answer. A full transfer of the shares to Audrey, Keith answered, without hesitation. After all, it's her mother's legacy, her family's legacy. You've lived a good life, Abbott. You have a pension. You have this house. And Audrey still has children to raise, a future to provide for. I almost chuckled. Children, Theons they kept putting off because Keith's career was more important. Now they suddenly remembered unwritten grandchildren when it came to money. Veronica wanted her business to stay in good hands, I said. In the hands of someone who shared her values and vision. Are you implying that I didn't share my mother's values? Audrey's face contorted with resentment. All I'm saying is that Veronica's decision was deliberate and informed, I replied, and I am not going to challenge it. Then you leave us no choice, Greenberg. Sighed. We will be forced to initiate legal proceedings. And I must warn you, Mr. Holbrook, that it may involve not only a challenge to the will, but also other aspects. What other aspects? I'm tense. Given your age and some observations about your physical and mental condition, the lawyer spoke carefully, choosing his words. We may raise the question of your capacity to manage such significant assets. I felt a cold rage rising inside me. This was it, what Veronica had warned me about. They were going to declare me incompetent to take control of the inheritance. Dad. Audrey looked frightened as if she was just now realizing where this conversation was taking them. We don't want to get to that point, but you have to understand it's too much money, too much responsibility for someone your age. Miaj, I repeated slowly. So, you think that at 76 I'm not capable of making decisions, not capable of running a business even though I spent 30 years running the project department of a major company. That was a long time ago, Dad, Audrey said softer now, as if reassuring. A child. The world had changed, business has changed. It's going to be hard for you to keep up. And Keith, of course, will not. I turned my Ghazi to my son-in-law. He's such a modern, progressive financier. I work in this field, Abbott. Keith shrugged his shoulders. I have experience and connections. I can be of use to the company. I'm sure you can, I nodded, except that Veronica seemed to doubt it. Keith's face flickered with irritation, but he quickly pulled himself together. Look, Abbott, he said in a businesslike tone. Let's be realistic. Even if you win this fight, and it will be a long, grueling process that will undermine your health, ultimately Howell inherit the stock when you die. Audrey is your only heir. So wouldn't it be better to pass them on now? Avoiding unnecessary conflict and expense? I looked at him at the confident, almost arrogant face of a man used to getting what he wanted. Audrey, who no longer seemed like my daughter, more like Keith's shadow, his appendage. The lawyer ready to use my age against me, and I realized it was time for my surprise. You're right, Keith, I said calmly. No one wants a protracted conflict. And I realized that at my age it would be wise to think years ahead. A shadow of relief ran across their faces. They thought they had broken me, that I was giving up. That is why I continued. I have already taken the necessary steps. I stood up, leaning on my cane, and walked over to the secretary in the corner of the living room. I opened the drawer and took out a folder of documents I had prepared with Warren Hartley's help over the past 2 weeks. What's this? Keith frowned. The documents transferring control of my interest in Preston Chemicals to a management trust, I replied, returning to my chair. Under this agreement, I retain the right to a lifetime income from the stock. But the operational and agent of my share goes to the company's board of directors, and upon my death, the shares will be put up for public trading with preemptive rights of redemption for existing shareholders. What? Keith straightened up sharply. You can't do that. I already did. I placed documents on the table between us. The agreement was signed 3 days ago and is effective immediately. It's legally flawless. You can check it out, Mr. Greenberg. The lawyer grabbed the papers and began to look through them quickly. His face grew darker with each page he read. It's really, he cleared his throat. The document is correct, but we can still challenge it on the same grounds of incapacity. You can try, I smiled. Just keep in mind that 2 independent doctors were present at the signing, and they testified to my excellent mental state. Besides, I had a full medical examination a week ago, the results of which are attached to the documents. And yes, I took an IQ test, 138 points, in case you were wondering. Pretty good for a man of my age, isn't it? Keith turned pale. I could literally see the thoughts racing through his head as he calculated his options and realized he'd lost. The stock would never belong to him. Not now, not after me death. All his plans fell apart in an instant. Dad. Audrey's voice trembled. Why did you do this? Why didn't you want the family business to stay in the family? Because it was your mother's wish, I answered. She believed the business should be run by people who shared her values and vision regardless of family ties. And I agree with her. You've disinherited your grandchildren. Audrey exclaimed. What grandchildren? I raised an eyebrow. The ones you and Keith keep putting off because you have to reach a certain status, a certain income level first. The ones you suddenly thought of when it came to money. Audrey recoiled as if struck by a blow. I'd never spoken to her that way, never been so direct. But now wasn't the time to soften the blow. You can't do this, she mumbled. It's not fair. Life isn't fair at all, honey. I sighed. And you know what else isn't fair? The way you and Keith have treated me and your mother these past few years. The way you ignored our requests for attention. The way you looked down on us. The way you treated me after Veronica died. We took care of you. Audrey raised her voice. You cared so much that you couldn't find time to visit me more than once a month. You cared enough to offer to sell the house and move into a nursing home so that you wouldn't be burdened by your presence. You cared by discussing my legal capacity. Behind my back and bringing in a lawyer to threaten me with a lawsuit if I didn't give you the money. I spoke calmly, but every word hit the mark. Audrey turned pale, tears welling up in her eyes. Abbott. Keith tried to control the situation. You've got it all wrong, Dot. We really want what's best for you. Don't bother, Keith. I held up my hand to stop. Him. We both know you're only interested in money. You've never made any secret of your contempt for me. Yao thought I was an old man out of my mind to be manipulated, but as you can see, I'm still capable of defending myself and my wife's legacy. Keith clenched his fists, but remained silent. Greenberg closed the file folder and handed it back to me. Under the circumstances, he said in a formal tone, I advise my clients to reconsider their position. Challenging this agreement will be a difficult and likely fruitless process. That is, we will lose, Keith translated, casting an irritated glance at Thelawir. There is a high probability of an unfavorable outcome. Greenberg replied diplomatically. Great. Keith stood up. That's great. Come on. Audrey, there's nothing more for us to do here. Audrey rose slowly, still looking at me with distrust and resentment. Daddy, her voice trembled. Do you really think we're only here for the money? Don't you? I looked her straight in the eye. When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? When you were interested in my life, not whether it was time for me to sell my house or move into a boarding house. When was the last time you were my daughter and not Keith's wife? She turned away, unable to find an answer. Keith took her by the elbow and led her toward the exit. Greenberg followed them, mumbling apologies. I remained seated in my chair, listening to the slamming of car doors, the starting of engines, the cars driving off down Thegraville driveway. Only when the sound died down completely did I let myself exhale. It was a victory, but there was no joy in it. Only the bitterness of realizing how far apart we were, how alien we'd become to Audrey. And somewhere deep inside a quiet pride that I could stand up for myself, protect Veronica's legacy, and prove that I was still capable of making decisions and fighting for what I thought was right. Veronica would be pleased, and that was most important thing. It had been a week since the unpleasant visit from Keith, Audrey, and their lawyer. I tried to get back into a routine, but conflicting emotions still raged inside me. Pride that I had been able to protect myself and Veronica's legacy mixed with bitterness at the realization that the gulf between my daughter and me had become seemingly insurmountable. Audrey didn't call. I made no attempt to contact her either, feeling that we both needed time to digest what had happened. Every night I sat by the phone thinking about dialing her number, and each time I hung up, not knowing what to say. "How do?" I explained to my daughter that it wasn't about money but about principles. Thursday morning, as I was having breakfast on the veranda, enjoying a rare sunny day, the doorbell rang. E wasn't expecting visitors and felt a prick of anxiety. Had Keith come up with a new method of pressure? Opening the door, I was surprised to see Diane Collins, Veronica's sister, on the doorstep. We hadn't seen each other since the funeral, though we'd talked on the phone several times. At 65, Diane retained the elegance and confidence that had always characterized the women of the Preston family. Her dark graying hair was gathered into a neat bun, and her eyes had a determination that reminded her of Veronica's. "Abbott," she smiled and hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry for the sudden visit, but I thought a face-to-face conversation would be better than a phone call." "Diane, I was genuinely pleased to see her. Come in, please. I'm just having breakfast on the veranda. Would you like to join me?" "I'd love to." She followed me through the house. It's still as cozy as ever. Veronica always had a way of creating a special atmosphere. I tried to keep the house just the way she liked it, I replied as I led Diane to Adable on the veranda. We sat down at the table and I poured her coffee from the thermos. We talked for a while about few other, about health, about mutual acquaintances, the usual small talk to postpone the more serious conversation that I felt was inevitable. "Abbott," Diane said at last, setting the cup aside. "I heard about what happened with Keith and Audrey. Richard told me about your confrontation." I sighed. "News travels fast. There are no secrets in the family business." She shrugged. "Especially when we're talking about that kind of money. Richard was impressed with the way you handled the trust. Said he didn't expect you to have such business acumen from a quiet retired engineer." I couldn't help but chuckle bitterly. Somehow, everyone forgets that I spent 30 years managing projects worth tens of millions of dollars, including, by Feeway, the construction of the new wing of the Preston Chemicals plant in the 9S. I remember. Diane nodded. "Veronica was very pleased with your work." Sighed. "You were the only contractor who delivered the project on time and on budget." We were silent for a moment, remembering times when our families were closer, when the future seemed clear and predictable. "How's Audrey?" Diane asked. "Had you two been in touch since the incident?" "No," I shook my head. "She hasn't called and neither have I. I don't know what to tell her." "She's furious," Diane said bluntly. "Keith's turned her against you. They were at lunch on Monday, and Audrey went on and on about how you betrayed the family and stole her inheritance." I cringed. Hearing that was painful, though not surprising. "It's Keith talking out of her mouth," he sighed. "He's always been a master manipulator." "Absolutely," Diane agreed. "But Audrey is a grown woman. She's responsible for what she says and does, even if she's under someone else's influence." I nodded, recognizing the validity of her words. As much as I wanted to blame Keith for everything, I couldn't ignore Audrey's role in ruining our relationship. "Do you know what hurt Keith the most?" Diane asked with a slight chuckle. That he wouldn't get control of the stock even after I died. Exactly, she nodded. He'd already made plans about how he was going to run the company, what changes he was going to make. He was telling Richard about his vision for the future of Preston Chemicals, a more aggressive growth strategy, a possible takeover of competitors, expansion into international markets. All the things Veronica was trying to avoid, I remarked. She always said that rapid growth often came at the expense of quality and corporate values. Veronica was a wise woman. Diane looked at the garden where she and her sister had once played. As children, she saw through people and she saw Keith for what he was. Ambitious, calculating, willing to use any connections to achieve his goals, including marriage to her daughter. Our conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling up. I recognized Keith's Audi and tensed. I think you have more guests, Diane remarked, recognizing the car as well. I wasn't expecting them, I mumbled, getting up. I'm sorry, I have to. I'll come with you, Diane said firmly, standing up. Perhaps my presence would help keep the conversation. Civilized, we walked through the housetto, the front door. I opened it before Keith could ring the bell. He looked surprised to see me on the doorstep, but recovered himself quickly. Abbott? He nodded. We need to talk. Hello, Keith. I didn't move from my seat. Where's Audrey? She's in the car. Keith glanced over his shoulder. She's upset. I thought I'd talk to you myself first. About what? I crossed my arms over my chest. I thought we talked about everything last time. Abbott, be reasonable. Keith lowered his voice. This situation is hurting all of us. Audrey is very worried. She feels betrayed, rejected by her own father. I wonder who put that idea into her head. I remarked dryly. Look, Keith stepped forward. We can settle this peacefully. I understand that you don't want to transfer the shares in your lifetime, but we can make an inheritance agreement that ensures that when you die, they go to Audrey, not to be auctioned off. Oh, so that's what this is all about? I shook my head. You're still hoping to take control of the company just a little later than you originally planned. This isn't about control. Keith was getting annoyed. It's about justice. It's about family legacy. Family legacy. Diane's voice suddenly came from behind me. She came forward and stood next to me. Interesting coming from the man who was about to completely change the company's strategy, contradicting everything the Prestons had built up over the decades. Keith visibly palled when he saw her. Diane, he tried to smile. I didn't expect to see you out here. I visit my family often. She smiled back coldly. Unlike some people, I don't show up only when money is involved. At that moment, the car door opened, and Audrey appeared. She looked pale and exhausted as if she hadn't slept for several nights. Daddy, she walked over to us, ignoring Diane. We need to talk alone. Anything you want to say to me, you can say in front of Diane, I replied, gesturing for them both to come in. Let's not discuss family matters on the doorstep. We moved into the living room. Audrey and Kit sat down on the sofa, and Diane and I took the chairs opposite now. I looked at my daughter. I'm listening, Daddy. Audrey stepped forward. Why are you doing this to us? What have we done to you? Her voice shook with resentment and incomprehension. I could see the genuine pain in her eyes, and it tore at my heart, but I couldn't back down. I'm not doing anything to you, Audrey, I replied calmly. I'm doing your mother's will and protecting what she entrusted to me. Budiem, her daughter, Audrey exclaimed. Her only daughter. Why did she disinherit him? Did she not didn't love me? She said the last words almost in a whisper, and he saw tears in her eyes. She loved you more than anything, Audrey, I said softly. But she saw what was happening to you, to us, to our family. She saw how you were changing, how you were pulling away from us, how you were letting Keith make all your decisions for you. That's not true. Audrey threw her head up. Keith has never controlled me. We're partners. We make decisions together. Really? I looked her straight in the eye. Then tell me, Audrey, was it your decision not to come to the hospital when I had my heart attack? Was it your decision to skip the last Christmas your mother spent at home for a ski resort with Keith's business associates? Your decision to give up that career as an architect you loved so much? Audrey turned pale. Keith put his hand on her shoulder. Don't answer that, he said. He's just trying to manipulate you to make you feel guilty. I'm not manipulating, I countered. I'm just reminding you of the facts that you seem to prefer to forget. How you've gradually let your life, your decisions, your relationship with your parents fall under your husband's control. That's ridiculous. Keith grinned contemptuously. You make it sound like I'm some kind of melodramatic villain. You love Audrey and I've always wanted the best for her. The best by your standards, Diane interjected. Which, oddly enough, have always coincided with what's best for you. You have no right to judge our relationship. Keith was beginning to lose his temper. You don't know what we talk about in private, what our plans and dreams are. But I do know. How you talked about your test behind his back, Diane parried. How you called him an old man out of his mind. How you and your colleagues discussed the possibility of declaring him incompetent so you could gain control of his finances before you even knew about Veronica's inheritance. I looked at Diane in surprise and then at Keith, who had gone noticeably pale. That's a lie, he muttered. I never. Benjamin Summers, Diane called out the name of one of the city's leading financiers. You discussed it with him at fundraiser in February. Ben is an old friend of mine, Keith. He was impressed with your cynicism. Audrey shifted her stunned gaze from Keith to Diane and back again. Was it true? She asked quietly. Keith, did you really say that about my father? Audrey, don't listen to them. Keith squeezed her hand. They are trying to fight us to destroy our family. Our family? I couldn't take it anymore. What about her family, Keith? The one she grew up in. The one you've systematically sidelined for your own ambitions. Dad, stop it. Audrey covered her face with her hands. I can't listen to this. Because it's the truth, Diane said softly. And somewhere deep down inside, you know it. Audrey, you're just afraid to admit how much you've lost by following Keith. That's enough. Keith stood up abruptly. We're leaving. I'm not going to let you brainwash my wife. Your wife? I stood up too, feeling the anger boiling up inside me. She's a human being first and foremost, Keith. A person with her own desires, her own dreams, her own opinions. She's my daughter, Diane's niece, not your property. Audrey, we're leaving. Keith pulled his wife by the arm. These people don't mean us any good. Audrey rose slowly, her eyes clouded with tears. I don't understand, she whispered. Why can't you all just be family? Why does everything have to be so complicated? Because some people make it complicated, honey. I replied. Some people put money and status before family ties. You mean you? Audrey suddenly blurted out, and I saw anger flash in her eyes. You're the one who disinherited my mother. You're the one who decided I wasn't worthy of being part of family business. I never said you weren't worthy, I countered. I unlie respect. The will of your mother who has seen you change under Keith's influence. How you let him make all your decisions for you. How you've drifted away from your roots, your values. My values? Audrey grinned bitterly. Were you to judge my values? You barely know me now. And whose fault is that? I asked quietly. Who stopped coming, stopped calling, stopped taking an interest in my life? Who looks at me like I'm a burden that needs to be put into a nursing home as soon as possible? Audrey recoiled as if struck by a blow. Something like shame flashed in her eyes. But Keith was already pulling her toward the exit. We're done talking about this, he said. Audrey, let's Go. We're not welcome here." "You're always welcome here, Audrey," I said, ignoring Keith. "This is your home, your family, but I will not allow myself or your mother's legacy to be used." Audrey stopped on the threshold and turned it around. Her face was contorted with emotion, resentment, anger, confusion. "You're selfish, Daddy," she said in a trembling voice. "You're a cruel, stubborn old man who can't bear to see his daughter grow up and live her own life. You're just jealous of my happiness with Keith." The words hit him like a slap in the face. I stood stunned, unable to find the words. Diana came over and put her hand on my shoulder in silent support. "One day you'll realize how wrong you've been, Audrey," she said calmly. "And when that day comes, remember that your father will always love you and wait for your return." Audrey answered nothing. She turned and walked quickly out of the house. Keith followed her with a triumphant gleam in his eyes. A minute later, we heard the sound of a car pulling away. I sank into my chair, feeling devastated. All the words I wanted to say to my daughter stuck in my throat. All the explanations I had prepared were useless in the face of her anger and resentment. "She doesn't understand," I whispered. "Surely believes I'm doing this out of selfishness." "She's confused," Diane said softly, sitting down next to me. "Keith manipulated her for years, isolating her from her family, forcing her to see the situation through his eyes. No wonder she can't grasp the truth right away. But what if she never does?" I looked at Diane with pain in my eyes. "What if I've lost her forever? I don't think that will happen." Diane shook her head. "Audrey is a smart woman no matter what, and she has Preston blood in her. Sooner or later, she'll see Keith for what he is." "In the meantime," Diane continued, "you have another family, Abbott. Me, Richard, our children, Preston Chemicals, all those who value you and your contributions. Don't let your conflict with Audrey and Keith define your life." "About your proposal," I said, gathering my strength. "I'm in. I want to be more involved in the company. I want to be useful, to use my experience, not just sit at home waiting for what?" Diane smiled, and in her smile I saw Veronica's reflection. "Welcome to the board, Abbott." She extended her hand to me. Veronica would be pleased. It had been 3 months since the day Audrey had left my house in anger. In that time, we hadn't exchanged a single word. I called twice, but both times I got an answering machine. The third time, I decided not to leave a message. If my daughter didn't want to talk to me, I wouldn't impose. At her age, one is no longer forced to maintain a relationship with her parents. It should be a voluntary decision based on love and respect, not a sense of obligation. The pain of the breakup hasn't gone away, but it's become dull, familiar, like an old injury that nags in rainy weather. I learned to live with it without letting it define every day of my life. After all, at 76, I knew the value of time too well to waste it on fruitless regrets. My life had changed more in those 3 months than it had in the previous 10 years. After years of quiet retirement, I once again felt needed, in demand, an active participant in the world, not just an observer. Joining the board of Preston Chemicals opened a new chapter of my life. At first, I feared that I wouldn't be a Blado Cope, that my experience was outdated, that younger employees would look at me as a relic of the past. But my fears quickly dissipated. I attended my first board meeting with some trepidation. As I entered the spacious conference room on the top floor of the company's main office, the conversations died down. Diane, seated at the head-off table, rose to meet me. "Gentlemen," she said, addressing the crowd, "let me introduce the newest member of the executive committee, Abbott Holbrook. Many of you know him as Veronica's husband, but he is here today as a shareholder and an experienced executive whose contributions to the company will be invaluable." Richard Preston, Veronica's brother, shook my hand with genuine warmth. Welcome to the family business, Abbott. We've been waiting a long time for you to join us. The rest of the board also greeted me, and I felt that I was not being received out of politeness, but with real respect and expectation. The first meeting was about the new line of environmentally friendly solvents, a project that Veronica had started shortly before her illness. I listened intently to reports on development, production, and marketing strategy. When it came to discussing the construction of the new plant, I couldn't stand it any longer and intervened. I apologize, I said, looking at the plan presented. But this project has serious flaws in terms of space efficiency. If we move the packaging line closer to the warehouse and reorganize the flow of materials, we could reduce logistics costs by at least 15%. There was silence. I was beginning to regret me bluntness when Diane laughed. That's why we invited you here, Abbott. Go on, please. I stood up and walked over to the projector where the plan was displayed. Taking a marker, I began sketching out my ideas, explaining how I could optimize space, shorten production cycle times, and reduce energy costs. 30 years of managing construction projects had not gone to waste. I saw opportunities for improvement where young designers focused on the latest technology were missing the basic principles of efficient production organization. By the end of the meeting, my suggestions were unanimously accepted, and the project's young architect, Jason Curtis, approached me with a notebook full of questions and ideas. Instead of the arrogance of an old man, I was met with genuine interest and a willingness to learn. Mr. Holbrook, he said, shaking my hand, I studied your projects of the 9 South in college. The renovation of the east wing of Preston Chemicals is considered a model of effective industrial design. It's an honor to work with you. I was touched and surprised. I never thought my old designs were being studied in colleges or that any of the younger generation even knew about my career. From that day on, my life was filled with new meaning. 3 times a week, I came to the company's office, participated in meetings, consulted engineers and architects, and helped optimize production processes. My experience was more valuable than I could have imagined, especially when combined with the energy and technological knowledge of the young professionals. At home, I spent evenings studying new technologies and materials to keep up with current trends. Jason would often stop by with questions or just to talk about the profession. He reminded me of myself when I was younger, just as enthusiastic, eager to do things right, and willing to learn from my elders. In his company, I felt myself not as an outdated dinosaur, but as a wise mentor, passing on knowledge to the next generation. But the most unexpected turn was my bonding with Diane's family, especially her son, Nate. Nate, a 32-year-old sustainability researcher, came to BO for the summer to work with Preston Chemicals' environmental department. We met at a company picnic that Diane threw to celebrate the successful launch of the first batch of new solvents. So, you're the Uncle Abbott my mom told me so much about, Nate said, approaching me with a glass of lemonade. The engineer who saved the green solvents project. Your mom's exaggerating. I smiled. I just put in a few suggestions for optimization. A few suggestions that saved the company $500,000, Nate grinned. I've seen the calculations. Impressive. We got a talking, and I was impressed by his knowledge of industrial ecology. He talked about new approaches to waste management, the concept of zero waste production, and the potential for renewable energy in the chemical industry. I shared my experience in designing energy-efficient buildings, and we soon discovered that our interests overlapped in many areas. You know, Nate said as the picnic was coming to an end, I'm working on a project to optimize water use in chemical plants. I could really use your expertise. Maybe we could talk about it sometime. Thus began our collaboration, which quickly grew into a friendship. Nate would come to my house and we would work on his project together, discussing ideas, arguing about technical solutions. Sometimes Jason would join us and my quiet house would be filled with the energy of young minds, fresh ideas, and heated discussions. Nate, unlike Audrey, was genuinely interested in my life, my views, my experiences. He asked questions about the past, not out of politeness, but out of genuine curiosity. He wanted to know how Veronica and I met, how I started my career, what projects I consider the most successful. He asked about Veronica and Diane's childhood, about the formation of Preston Chemicals, about the values the company's founder had, built into its foundation. "It's amazing," he said one day, looking at old family photos. "I always thought of Grandpa Preston as a dry businessman obsessed with profit. Turns out he was a true idealist who believed the chemical industry could be environmentally responsible. He was ahead of his time." He nodded. "In the 60s, few people thought about the environmental impact of industrial development, and he was already pushing for closed-loop water treatment and reduced emissions. Veronica inherited his vision. Her green solvents project is a direct extension of his ideas." Nate hesitated, fiddling with a picture of his grandfather. "No, I always felt like a bit of an outsider in the family. My interests seemed too idealistic, non-technical. My parents wanted me to be a chemical engineer like my grandfather or a financier like my father. I went into environmental science. They didn't judge me, but I felt I disappointed them." "Actually the closest to your grandfather's original vision," I said. "It's just that you've chosen a different path toward the same goal, environmentally responsible business." Nate's eyes lit up. "Is that really what you think?" "I know that," I smiled. "Your grandfather would be proud of you, and so would Veronica." After that conversation, Nate started dropping by more often. Sometimes he brought his girlfriend Lauren, a young environmentalist teacher from the local college. Sometimes Diane would come over too, and we'd have impromptu family dinners. My house, which had been empty and quiet for so long after Veronica's death, was once again filled with voices, with laughter, with life. I remembered Veronica's words from her letter. "Don't let grief for me cloud your remaining years. Live fully. Rejoice in every day." Now I realized that was exactly what she meant. Not just an existence, not just doing routine chores, but a real life. With new interests, new connections, new joys. Of course, I still missed Audrey. Every time the phone rang, I hoped for a moment to hear her voice. Every holiday, I thought of her, remembering how we celebrated them together when she was old. But I learned not to let that pain poison my new life. In the early fall, when the Green Solvents project was successfully launched, the company threw a big celebration. Richard Preston invited business partners, local government officials, and the press. I was to give a presentation on the innovative aspects of production. Preparing for the presentation, I was as nervous as a student before an exam. It's one thing to discuss technical details in a small circle of specialists and quite another to present the project to the general public. Nate helped me prepare by patiently listening to my practice speeches and giving me tips on how to improve my presentation. "You can do it, Uncle Abbott," he said the night before the event. "No one knows this project better than you." It's not easy to speak in front of large audiences at my age, I admitted. "I'm afraid I'll forget important details or get confused by numbers. That's what slides are for." Nate smiled. "But even if you forget something, it's okay. People aren't here for a perfect presentation, but to hear from the person who saved and improved an important project. Your experience and contribution speak for themselves." His words gave me confidence, and the next day I felt ready to speak. The gala was held in the large hall of the town hall, which was full of people. I noticed a few of my old colleagues from the engineering company where I worked before I retired. They waved to me and I felt a surge of pride. They had come to support me on this important day. When Richard Preston introduced me as a key figure in the success of the project, I took the stage to a round of applause. Taking a deep breath, I began my presentation talking about how an innovative approach to organizing fee production made it more efficient and environmentally friendly. I spoke confidently, clearly with the enthusiasm of a person who is passionate about his work. I showed slides, explained graphs, and gave examples from my own experience. The audience listened attentively. Many took notes. When I finished, the hall burst into applause. After the presentation, people came up to me, journalists, business representatives, former colleagues. Everyone wanted to ask questions, congratulate me, express their admiration. I felt that I was not a 76-year-old widower, but a professional in the prime of life whose knowledge and experience are valued and in demand. Among those who approached was my old friend Benjamin Paxton, my regular chess partner. Abbott. He shook me hand firmly. You look 20 years younger than you did 3 months ago. What happened? Life happened, Ben, I smiled. Just life. At the buffet after the presentation, I stood surrounded by Diane, Nate, Lauren, and Jason as Richard Preston raised a glass to the success of the project. I want to thank the person without whom this day would not have happened, he said, looking in my direction. Abbott, your contribution to the company has been invaluable. You didn't just save Veronica's project. You breathed new life into it, made it better, more efficient, more promising. Veronica would be proud of you. I felt tears coming to my eyes. The thought that I was able to continue Veronica's work to preserve and build on her legacy filled me with deep satisfaction. I'm only doing her will, I replied, raising my glass. To Veronica and her vision for the future of the company, to Veronica, all those present joined in. Returning home after the celebration, I felt a strange peace. It was as if the circle had closed. As if all fee decisions made over the past months, all the changes in my life had brought me to this very moment. The moment of recognition, respect, fulfilled duty, tough memory of my wife. At home, I sat in Veronica's chair by the window, looking out at the moonlight garden. I recalled all the events of the last few months. The conflict with Keith and Audrey, the decision to join the board of directors, the rapprochement with Nate and his family, the success of the project. Each of these events had changed me, forced me to grow, to learn, to adapt. I thought about Audrey, about her accusations of selfishness and cruelty. Maybe in her eyes, I really was like that. Maybe she would never understand my motives, never see the situation through my eyes. And maybe I'd have to accept that as fact, as a reality I couldn't change. But I also thought about the new connections I'd made. Nate, who was almost a son to me, Jason, who saw me as a mentor, Diane, and Richard, who had accepted me as a full member of the Preston family. I thought of the people in the company who respected me for my experience and contributions rather than pitying me like a lonely old man. I realized that the breakup with Audrey, as painful as it had opened up new possibilities, new horizons for me, freed from toxic relationships, from the constant feelings of inferiority that Keith and sadly Audrey herself had created. I was able to see and embrace my worth, my potential, my ability to live a fulfilling life even in my old age. My house, which once seemed too big and empty for a lonely widower, was now filled with new memories, new voices, new energy. It ceased to be a museum of the past and became a place where the present and future were being created. I knew that the door would always remain open for Audrey. If one day she saw the truth about Keith, if she realized how he had manipulated her, if she wanted to rebuild a relationship with me, I would welcome her with open arms. But I will no longer wait for Thatman. No longer pause my life in the hope of a reconciliation that may never come. Instead, I will live fully, actively, with gratitude for every day, for every opportunity, for every person who enters my life. I will continue Veronica's work, preserving and building on her legacy. I will share my experience with the younger generation, helping them avoid the mistakes we made. And maybe one day Audrey will see me not as a selfish, cruel old man, but as a man who simply stood up for what he believed in, who followed his principles even when it was unpopular or painful. In the meantime, for now, I will enjoy this new chapter of my life, full of challenges, discoveries, and real genuine relationships with people who appreciate me for who I am.